What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got our week 2 running back starts and sits for every single matchup, so make sure to tune in. And also, if you guys are interested, check us out online at alldaypigskin.com for some exclusive content. Become a VIP to get personalized fantasy advice throughout the entire season from yours truly. And also, if you guys want some more interaction opportunities throughout the entire week, follow us on Twitter at alldaypigskin. But for now, let's get right into it. Before getting into it, a quick word from our sponsors at Overlay Fantasy Sports, who take DFS to a whole nother level. And if you guys are sick and tired of betting on the same old Team A versus Team B money line and spread picks, well, Overlay Fantasy is here to help you out with their matchup shop function, which allows you to pick between individual player matchups every single week for whichever game you want. All you have to do is find the matchup that you like, put a couple dollars on it, and potentially win big. So do yourself a favor. Don't only do all of that player matchup homework just to benefit your fantasy team, but also do it so it can benefit your wallet. And Overlay Fantasy Sports does a great job of giving you that opportunity. As you can see, there's a bunch of bets here that you can take a chance on, not only quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, whatever the case might be. And the NFL isn't the only option here. So if you're someone that's all about golf or MLB or NBA, well, Overlay Fantasy Sports has that for you. So make sure to go ahead and check them out. We kick off our week 2 running back starts and sits with the Bengals at the Browns. Here, it's simple. You have to start Joe Mixon. Yes, he's coming off a disappointing week, but guess what? You still drafted him at the end of the first, early second round to be your RB1, and maybe his upside isn't as big as we were hoping for, to be a top tier RB1, but still mid-level RB1, low-end RB1 is still worth a start. And it's going to be better usage as the season progresses. As Joe Burrow gets better, so will the output for Joe Mixon. For that reason, you have to start him here. Then for the Browns, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, we like both these guys as starts. Nick Chubb, poor performance, similar to a Joe Mixon in week 1, but guess what? It was all about game flow here. The Browns were down pretty quickly, so they had to abandon the rush. But in standard scoring, Nick Chubb is a good mid to low end RB1, while Kareem Hunt actually outtouched Nick Chubb. But again, think about this as game flow. That's not going to happen every single week. Regardless, in PPR scoring, Kareem Hunt is not a bad low end RB2 every single week. Get you between 10 and 15 points at that spot. We think that will be the case for him pretty much the entire season. Next, going to the Giants at the Bears, you're starting Saquon Barkley, obviously. Barkley is a top 3 running back every single week, regardless of the matchup. So not only as a rusher, but also as a pass catcher, you have Barkley locked and loaded. Looking at the Bears, David Montgomery, a little bit underwhelming in week 1, but let's factor he's coming off that groin injury, and the Bears were down quickly versus the Lions, so they had to take away a little bit of focus from the rush. We don't anticipate that to be the case as much here versus the Giants, and Montgomery should get more and more volume and play as the season progresses, so we like him as a mid-level RB2, and when he did get the ball in that game versus the Lions, he looked good. Then Tariq Cohen. We're actually going to sit Tariq Cohen because we've said it before, Mitch Trubisky can't really maintain all that many viable pass-catching fantasy weapons. Allen Robinson, and then that's pretty much it. Tariq Cohen doesn't get enough starts as a pure rusher, and if the pass catching isn't there after Allen Robinson, we're just not interested in Cohen. Going to the Rams at the Eagles, there's a lot of things to monitor here. First and foremost, we're listing Miles Sanders as a start, but that's assuming that he can go and play in this game. If not, we're not starting a single Philadelphia Eagle in this game because Boston Scott, Clement, neither of those guys are on the level of Miles Sanders, and we saw what the Eagles were going to face versus formidable defensive lines in week 1 with the Washington matchup. Their offensive line is banged up to hell, and honestly, the upside for every single one of these running backs is not what we were expecting heading into this season. For that reason, I'm only starting Miles Sanders if he suits up. And honestly, even if that's the case, I'm not viewing him as an RB1 in this matchup. I'm viewing him as an RB2. Then for the Rams, Malcolm Brown was the name that jumped out in week 1. I'm going to say that that won't be the case for the majority of the season, but go and enjoy this streak of Malcolm Brown while you can. Pick him up off waivers, insert him from your bench, whatever the case might be. I think that Malcolm Brown will still have another week or two where he is the main guy and gets those goal line carries. For that reason, I will start Malcolm Brown as a low-end RB2 type of situation. And then I'm sitting Boston Scott and Cam Akers. I'm sitting Boston Scott regardless. He also got nicked up in week 1, and Cam Akers just doesn't get enough volume, not used at the goal line enough to warrant a start in my opinion. Falcons and Cowboys, this is simple. You're starting both of these guys. Gurley was saved by a touchdown in week 1, but that was because, for the most part, afterwards, the Falcons had to focus on the passing attack. I don't think the Cowboys will be blowing out the Falcons like we saw with the Seattle Seahawks. Todd Gurley should be more involved, should have more rush attempts. And then Ezekiel Elliott, he's a stud. He's an integral part of that Dallas offense. What else can we say? Another top 3 running back every single week. Panthers at Bucks. You are starting Christian McCaffrey, obviously. The guy was great versus the Raiders. Maybe you would have liked to see a little bit more pass catching volume, but he still scored twice. So either way, he's the main weapon for the Panthers, arguably the best fantasy running back every single week in terms of how versatile he is. Then for the Bucks, this is where it really gets interesting, because in our eyes, Leonard Fournette is the better running back. And that's what the game film would go ahead and indicate if you watch that entire game. But Ronald Jones was the one that by far got more carries. And if Ronald Jones is in line for another one of those performances, we love the main running back, whoever it might be here, versus the Panthers, because we saw it. Josh Jacobs absolutely blew up the Panthers. This is a defense that's young, that's rebuilding, and was worst in the league last year defending the run. So we think that Ronald Jones not as talented as Leonard Fournette, but he'll get the volume and that'll translate to some production. Then, obviously, as you can predict, we are sitting Leonard Fournette. Like we said before, we don't think that he should be the backup to Ronald Jones, but that's the way it is right now. Maybe he eclipses him as the season progresses, but at this point in time, we just don't have enough faith in starting Leonard Fournette on a week-to-week basis. 49ers at Jets next. You're only going to want to start Raheem Mostert here, and that's pretty confident. Low-end RB1 type of upside. We saw what Mostert did in week 1, the unquestioned running back to own out of the 49ers, and we think he should have a pretty successful day versus a lousy Jets team. Then on the sit side, Tevin Coleman a little bit nicked up, didn't get enough usage. We're fading him from the 49ers. The Jets here, it's interesting. Le'Veon Bell, Frank Gore, the two names to know. Le'Veon Bell got nicked up with that hamstring in week 1, then sat out, so he might not even play in week 2, but even if he does, we don't like the matchup here. We don't trust this Jets offense. And then Frank Gore, if he's the starter, we don't like Frank Gore as a start because he doesn't have enough upside as a pass catcher. We don't think his upside as a pure rusher is all that great either. You're probably looking at 50, 60 yards, so we're fading all of the Jets running backs. Going to the Broncos with the Steelers, James Conner is a must start in our eyes pretty much every single week. We love James Conner behind that offensive line as far as him being a dual threat running back on top of that. So we're starting James Conner here. Then Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay. Honestly, this was the hardest decision in terms of running back start sits for me to go ahead and determine, because you could argue both these guys should be sits because they pretty much really vulture each other. And Melvin Gordon could have a great week one time, then it could be Phillip Lindsay. It's 50-50 unless there's an injury. We don't necessarily trust one of these guys. But right now, with the running back landscape being what it is, and with some guys underperforming, some injuries, you could get low-end RB2 potential from both these guys. So for that reason, we tentatively list them both as starts. Looking at the Jaguars at the Titans, only one name here to mention as a start, that is Derrick Henry. Obviously, we think he's going to have a good outing versus the Jaguars. He's still that bell cow type of running back, more suited for standard scoring, but regardless, he's a top 10 play. Then looking at the sits, we're sitting James Robinson, we're sitting Chris Thompson. Yes, James Robinson had some nice usage in week 1, but we think this will be a little bit of a tougher matchup. And then Chris Thompson just didn't get volume enough or even work as a pass catcher. For that reason, we are fading Chris Thompson. Looking at the Lions and Packers, similar situation here, only starting Aaron Jones. Yes, it'll likely be a roller coaster ride with Aaron Jones all season long, touchdown dependent, but this is a good matchup versus the Lions and the Packers. If week 1 is any indication, they might score 50 points here, so Jones has the upside there. As far as sits, we're sitting every single one of the running backs for the Lions. Adrian Peterson, Kerryon Johnson, DeAndre Swift. Adrian Peterson did lead all those running backs in terms of rushes, but his upside as a pass catcher isn't enough, not as explosive as Kerryon or DeAndre Swift. And the other guys, it's a running back by committee. They're not the number one guy. And even though they might have some upside as pass catchers, it's not nearly enough. So you sit all of them. Going to the Bills at the Dolphins, we're tentatively starting both Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. Yes, the best running back on the Bills is Josh Allen, and Devin Singletary and Zach Moss had almost identical splits, but this is a positive matchup. So for that reason, we're all right taking a chance on both these guys as low-end RB2s. If there's one guy that we'd say you prioritize, probably Singletary because of his pass catching, but it's honestly really close. It's going to be whoever gets in the end zone. That's going to be the preferred option, but we can't necessarily say so for that reason. Both low-end starts. Then you're sitting every single person on the Dolphins. Howard, Breida, and Gaskin. We don't believe in any one of these running backs. No one really separated themselves in our eyes enough to be the guy. We don't trust the offensive line, so we are sitting all these guys. Vikings at Colts next. We're starting Dalvin Cook. Obviously, he should have a better outing than he did in week 1. And not only as a rusher, but also as a pass catcher. Then for the Colts, no more Marlon Mack. That didn't take long. Jonathan Taylor is now a weekly must start, especially if he continues to get volume as a pass catcher. And Nyheim Hines, could he be the Austin Eckler of last year with Phillip Rivers? Maybe not as much upside because of Jonathan Taylor, but a great PPR option, similar to a Kareem Hunt now every single week. Washington at the Cardinals, you're starting Kenyon Drake. Yes, it's a tough matchup, but the Cardinals will feed the ball to Kenyon Drake, so he's a low-end RB1 this week. Then for Washington, you're sitting all those guys, Peyton Barber, Antonio Gibson, probably the two main names. This is a situation right now that's too similar to what we were seeing from the Bucs last season with Ronald Jones and with Peyton Barber. You just don't know who the guy will be on any given week, so for that reason, we're fading both of them. Getting the Ravens at the Texans, we're starting David Johnson. We like what we saw from him in week 1, especially as a pass catcher and as a rusher staying healthy. He's going to be involved in this offense. This will likely be a high scoring affair, so we like David Johnson as a low-end RB1. Then sitting, we're sitting Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins. Yes, Dobbins had a nice performance, 2 touchdowns, but Lamar Jackson remains the best running back here. This is a running back by committee. What we were saying about Mark Ingram all season long, he's going to regress big time if the touchdowns aren't there. He's going to be extremely disappointing, and he's not going to get the volume. So honestly, we're fading both of these guys pretty much all season long unless there's an injury. Chiefs at Chargers. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a must start. He separated himself from Darrell Williams as the game progressed in week 1. We like him here. He should see more usage as a pass catcher as well. Then Austin Eckler, one of the bigger disappointments in week 1. He did have some nice volume as a rusher, but almost nothing as a pass catcher, and that's what makes them so valuable, especially in PPR formats. We do think that that will improve, but if it doesn't happen here in a game that should be extremely high scoring from the side of the Chiefs, then it might be time to look and sell Austin Eckler, because if it doesn't happen here, then it might not happen for the rest of the season, but we'll see. Then from the sits, we're sitting Darrell Williams. You know, there was some nice hype heading into the season, but we think Clyde Edwards-Helaire did enough in week 1 to separate himself. Darrell Williams is now just a handcuff. Then Joshua Kelly. Honestly, Kelly really emerged and did some nice things in week 1 for the Chargers, and maybe it's a little bit confusing, but he's the 1B to the 1A of Austin Eckler, looks like. Got some goal line carries, and that's really concerning for Austin Eckler's value. But again, in this matchup, the way we see this thing unfolding, we don't think Josh Kelly is a good start here. Austin Eckler will still command the majority of volume and should see a lot more targets as well. Going to the Patriots at the Seahawks, we're starting Chris Carson. He had 2 receiving touchdowns in week 1. Not all that much success on the ground, but maybe that's because the Seahawks were up for the majority of the game and just wanted to give Carlos Hyde some run. But in this game, we're starting Chris Carson. We think he should go and improve and return to being that big volume rusher. We're also starting James White. Out of all the running backs in New England, even though we think Cam Newton is the best one, James White probably has the highest upside because of what he can do as a pass catcher. Again, falls in that Kareem Hunt, Naheem Hines category. Sits, we're sitting Sony Michel. Yes, we like Michel. If Tom Brady was still there, he'd have higher upside, but with Cam Newton vulturing all those goal line opportunities, we have to sit Michel. And then Carlos Hyde, we're sitting him here. Yes, he had a touchdown in week 1, but in a game that maybe should be a little bit more competitive, a little bit not as much of a blowout, we're going to sit Hyde. Then Saints at the Raiders. You're starting Alvin Kamara, obviously a top 5 running back every single week. Christian McCaffrey just absolutely burned the Raiders. We think Alvin Kamara can do the same. Josh Jacobs, it'll be tougher versus the Saints, but he will get volume here. Not as much upside as he did in week 1, but he should still be a top 10 running back. And then as far as the sits, we're sitting Latavius Murray. We think this will be the Alvin Kamara show. So with that, we wrap up our week 2 running back starts and sits. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree? Along with your own personal start and sit questions, we will do our best to answer them. And another quick reminder, go ahead, check us out online at alldaypigskin.com for some exclusive content. Potentially become a VIP member and get exclusive fantasy help throughout the season from yours truly. And if you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. But in the meantime, we'll see you in future videos.